Everyone, welcome to today's seminar, which is entitled Diving Across the Animal Kingdom When the Search for Food Drives the Evolution. In this presentation, I will talk about heterothermic animals, animals that have maintaining the same body temperature all the time, approximately 37 to 39 degrees Celsius, and animals with lungs. I will not talk about fish, which of course have gills. They can breathe underwater, and not reptiles, which also dive, but they also can get oxygen through their skin. So they are kind of cheating when they go down in the water. There is a lot of different animals that are very good at diving. You know, of course, whales. This is killer whale, and down to the right you have a diving humpback whale. But also seals, represented here by the harp seal in the ice, but otters and also birds are very good divers. This is the guillemot, which is a very good diver. Why do animals dive? Well, the most important thing is, of course, to get food. So diving is the diving ability, and it has been evoluted or has been through evolution to get food. And which kind of depth you go down to depends a little bit on the competition for food, and also what food you you want to get. Of course, animals also dive to avoid predators, and they dive to reach their hides or dens. For instance, the beaver, but also the otter has entrance to its den underwater. So predators mainly, because predators cannot reach the den. I have some examples of how deep different animals can dive and how long they can be underwater. Remember that these animals have lungs, so they cannot breathe underwater. The little auk can actually dive to almost 200 meters and stay underwater for approximately 10 minutes. Probably it could stay longer underwater, but if it doesn't need to stay longer than 10 minutes, it doesn't do that. The sperm whale can dive to 3,000 meters, which is the deepest dive that has ever been recorded in the animal kingdom, and can stay submerged underwater for 2.5 hours. So that's the expert. Then the southern elephant seal, as you can see in this picture, is a really huge seal. It's on the southern hemisphere. It can dive to 2,000 meters and stay submerged for 2 hours. The hooded seal, which is the best diver of the Arctic, could dive to 1,500 meters and stay underwater for 1.5 hours. Then you have the otter, which could dive to 140 meters and stay submerged for 10 minutes. But probably, as mentioned, they can stay submerged for longer if they need to. I also took just a picture of a sea otter pup, which not just because it was incredibly cute, actually. And then you have the human. We are used to being best at everything, but in diving we are not very good. The first or deepest free dive of a human was to 100 meters, but the human, I don't remember his name, but it was an Englishman. He then went very quickly down to 100 meters and very quickly up. So the dive took, I think, 5-6 minutes. And he is an expert then in taking care of the pressure, which I will come back to. But if the human record of staying submerged underwater is 15 minutes, but then the human has to really almost get into a coma or a trance and be very well trained, and also hyperventilate before it goes under. And it's a lot of training to get a human to get 15 minutes. So I think that we are the worst divers in the animal kingdom. So how do we know this? Well, from old days, or not so old days, the first time was that sperm whale was, there was an undersea cable which was not working anymore, and they were trying to get the break or to fix the cable, and they saw that sperm whale was entangled in the cable, and that was probably because it thought it was an octopus, so it bit over it. But also we have been filming, or Norwegian oil rigs have been filming little auks that dive down to find food around the feet of the oil rig, and they have cameras on these feet to check that they are okay, and these cameras were filming these little auks. I didn't find this on the net, but I have some other movies I will show you. But in recent, let's say, the last 20 years, satellite trackers have been developed so that we can tag, for instance, here an elephant seal or a hooded seal. The satellite taggers, recorders or transmitters are glued to the fur, and they will fall off when the seal changes its fur once a year. And this recorder records dive depth, and how long it's underwater. It could also record other things. So actually, some seals are checking the environment in the ocean for us. And when they are coming up to the surface again, and this antenna is in air, then the information is sent to a satellite and then down to a computer at the researcher's office. So then we were absolutely sure of how deep, we could prove how deep and how long these animals were underwater. I will show you a film now from YouTube showing a diving sperm whale. This is a roe. That is the American scientists have, now it's down on 600 meters, and suddenly a sperm whale is approaching the roe deep, and they are very, of course, excited about this. And as you can see, 600 meters is not very deep for a sperm whale, so it's very calm. It's just going around and looking at the light and what is this, and it has no problems at 600 meters, of course, and taking it very easy and investigating this strange thing. See a little bit more on there. You can see the sperm whale going through the so this is only 600 meters. We know that this now is able to go down to 3,000 as mentioned. Yeah, and then I have a little movie on the common guillemot, how it dives, uses its wings. You've probably seen this before. How it effectively, so it's this bird is actually on its way to, in the evolution stairway to becoming a penguin, and they can dive to 160 meters. Okay, so this satellite tracking, this represented by hooded seal, has shown also the enormous distances that these seals swim within 6 months. You can see this map here showing where the seal has been within 6 months. It was tagged here in east coast of Greenland. And also on the transect from Greenland to the Faroe Islands, you can see that this seal has been diving a lot, to 1,000 meters. That was the maximum dive of this seal, and that's because on this depth it has a food item it wants, namely the small squid. So also they dive around these upwellings where you have underwater mountains, where you get upwellings of water and a lot of nutrient-rich water. Also you get squid there. So this is pretty amazing if you look at the area that this seal has been swimming in 6 months. Also, you see that every time it's been down, it has to be for a while on the surface to reoxygenate everything. So, fact and challenges in diving in heterothermic animals. That is, when you have lungs and not gills. Of course, you need oxygen with you because, as you know, a fish has gills and get oxygen all the time underwater. But if you don't have gills, you have to bring it with you. So it means that you have to fill up your stores, your oxygen stores. Where is these oxygen stores? Well, they are in the blood, in the muscles, and in the spleen. And you need to economize with it because even though you have a lot of oxygen with you, we cannot explain how you stay submerged underwater for 1.5 hours. So you need to economize with it, and you need to shut down the blood supply to all organs that you don't need during a dive. So just close them off and don't give them blood. Then you preserve the blood and the oxygen for the organs that are important, and you kind of maybe supply only 30% of the animal. Also remember that at 0 meters at the sea surface, the atmospheric pressure is 1 atmosphere, and that is actually the weight of the air from the sea surface all the way out to space. But at 1,500 meters, the atmosphere is 150. So the pressure is enormous at this depth. So they need to protect themselves against this pressure. I will come back to that. So the degree of how much different animals have the ability to do all of these things depend on what the animal needs. For instance, the harp seal, they dive to 300-400 meters to eat food there. And in competition with the hooded seal, which is in the same area, the hooded seal goes further down to get other prey to avoid competition with the harp seal. So that's why we think that the hooded seal has developed much better, or we think then much better diving ability. Also, an interesting feature is that when the body mass increases, the metabolic rate, or the watts produced per kilogram of body mass, goes down. That means that the bigger you get, the less metabolic rate you have per kilogram body mass, and the less oxygen you need. And that's why the best diver is the huge sperm whale, and the second best is the huge elephant seal, and then you kind of go down in body mass and diving ability. It's approximately right. Okay, before I now tell you more about how this is possible, we'll talk quickly about how you get oxygen into your blood. This is a small portion of the lung, or alveoli, which is the smallest part of the lung, and just like a grape. And you have air in and air out. You have fresh air in with oxygen, which goes into the blood. Here first with the blue blood cells, meaning that they are not oxygenated. Then these red blood cells are filled with oxygen. They get red, and you have fresh oxygenated blood that goes to the body. At the same time, these blood cells release carbon dioxide, which is what we breathe out, which is the output of the metabolism, and we get this out when we exhale. So each red blood cell is filled with hemoglobin molecules, and one hemoglobin molecule can attach 4 oxygen molecules. So this is an example of a red blood cell which is emptied for oxygen, comes to the lung, and then is filled up with oxygen. All the hemoglobin molecules attach 4 oxygen molecules, and then it's ready to go to the tissues or the cells, and this oxygen is released in the cells. But what does actually oxygen do? Why is oxygen important for us? Why do we need it? Well, it's very interesting because in this is oxygen, which of course consists of 2 oxygen atoms. If you look at the cell, which have a lot of different organs or organelles, we have the mitochondria, which is the power plant of the cell. So the oxygen goes into the mitochondria. And the mitochondria have 2 membranes, the outer membrane and a very convoluted inner membrane. And the convolution of the inner membrane is to increase the surface so that you can produce more of the energy that you need. The next picture, you just don't have to look into the details. I will just explain very simply how it works. Just show you first that this is the outer mitochondrial membrane, and this is the convoluted inner membrane. The only reason that we need oxygen is because oxygen is going to receive electrons, which goes in the inner mitochondrial membrane, and when oxygen goes together with protons, 4 protons, it becomes 2 water molecules. So the only reason we need oxygen is because oxygen needs to receive electrons going in the inner mitochondrial membrane. This current, which is a small electric current, drives protons to the intermembrane space, which in the end goes through ATP, adenosine triphosphate synthase, which then produces the universal energy molecule ATP. So by taking electrons, oxygen becomes water, and this gives the production of the universal energy molecule ATP, which the body of all animals uses for energy production or moving muscles, whatever. They use it for everything. So this is the reason why we need oxygen. Okay, so why do diving animals, what do diving animals got that you don't? First of all, they have more blood. That means that they have more red blood cells and also more hemoglobin, as explained just a few minutes ago. An adult human man has approximately 5% blood of body mass, so approximately 4 or 5 liters. A hooded seal, for instance, or seals, they have 20% blood of body mass. So they have much more blood. And they have also more red blood cells per milliliter of blood. So they have more viscous blood. The blood is more tight. Actually, humans have approximately 40% cells, red blood cells, and some other cells also, of course, percent of the blood. But the seals have 70% blood cells, also almost 70% red blood cells in the blood, and that gives a lot more hemoglobin. Also, each red blood cell of a seal or a diving animal has more hemoglobin stacked into it. So altogether, this gives a lot more oxygen in the blood and per milliliter of blood in diving animals compared to not diving animals. Also, they have huge amounts of myoglobin, which is a molecule related to hemoglobin. You can look at the name. And myoglobin is a molecule that stores oxygen within the muscle cells. It can store 2 oxygen molecules. The amount of myoglobin in the muscle it gives the color of the muscle. So seals and diving animals and whales have almost black muscle. The meat is almost black because it's so filled with myoglobin. While, for instance, the chicken has almost no myoglobin, and you know all that the color of the chicken meat is almost white. And then we and the cows and the sheep, they have in between this. Also, the diving animals have the ability to suppress the urge to breathe, which you all have experienced, for instance, when you try to dive as long as you can. At a certain point, the oxygen level is so low in your body and the CO2 levels are so high that the brain kind of decides that now you have to breathe, and then you have to go up. But these diving animals can suppress this urge to breathe. The most important thing is to shut down blood supply to organs that are not important during a dive. For instance, if a seal goes down and is going to dive for a maximum amount of time, in an Arctic seal, half of the body mass, 50%, is blubber. So it shuts down the blood supply to the blubber, then it gets rid of 50% of the body, and then it shuts down the blood supply to the muscle, because the muscle have enough myoglobin to take care of its own oxygen supply, and then you kind of shut off organs that you don't need. So you can conserve the blood and the oxygen for the important organs like the brain, for instance, and maybe the uterus in pregnant animals. Also, they have an extreme buffer capacity in the blood, because, as you all know, you get lactic acid in the muscles when you have limited oxygen and you, for instance, do exercise. And to suck up this lactic acid, which is dangerous because it decreases the pH, it's important. And these animals have an extreme buffer capacity in the blood. And then to this pressure that I've talked about, the enormous pressure at, for instance, only 1,000 meters. The pressure, when it's increasing, it will compress all air cavities in your body. If you compress a cavity or a balloon with water, the water will only come out some other place. So fluids are incompressible, but the air is compressible and will increase the pressure. And you have known this when you go down to, let's say, 4 or 5 meters, you get a pain in your ears, and that's because your middle ear is filled with air, and the pressure increases on this air, and this gives a pain. So when the diving animals go down, they just have a small piece of tissue in the middle ear, which they fill with blood, and then you have fluid there, and it's incompressible, so they don't get this pain when they dive. Also, they have the ability to lower the brain temperature, actually, with half a degree, 1 degree, and this saves a lot of oxygen, because the brain is enormously uses a lot of oxygen. And then, of course, they have this ability to avoid the diving sickness or bends, which they do by having very enforced tubes that goes down to the lungs, called bronchi, which will not be compressed during the dive because of the pressure, and therefore will not release more oxygen and nitrogen, which is the reason for the bends, into the blood. And all these animals, they exhale, they breathe out and empty the lungs before they go down, to avoid nitrogen coming into the blood and giving the bends. Okay, so I talked a little bit about shutting down different organs, and of course you might know that arteries, they have muscles around around them. So when these muscles, which are composed as rings, contract, then you just close the vessel completely. And when you close the vessel, the blood will stop here and will not reach the organ or cells that are to the right of these rings of muscles. So that's how you kind of regulate which organs are getting blood. You just close off the vessel, the supply. This is just a piece from seal. What you call that again? Placenta, the seal placenta, which is found on the which was found on the ice, and this shows you blood vessels that are getting closer and smaller and reaching all the cells in this tissue. So if you close down the vessel here, then you close down the blood supply to the whole area which is supplied by this vessel. This is shown here on the lower left panel. You can see that there's some contrast fluid that injected into the blood, and this is a seal in air, and you can see the big arteries here. But when the seal is put underwater, it closes these vessels, and the color, of course, the blood disappears. They are shut down, and then you cannot see the vessels anymore. I will not go into detail on this, but you can see that the percent change in blood flow, blood supply to a lot of different organs goes down. Some of them almost 100% during a dive, but the brain gets the same or a little bit more. Okay, so now we will talk a little bit about another challenge that these animals have, at least in the Arctic areas, and that's of course the temperature regulation when you are diving. Because what is actually the difference between water and air regarding heat loss? Well, if you take water at 4 degrees and air at 4 degrees, the same temperature, it's a lot colder to be in 4 degrees water than in 4 degrees air. You know this, of course. And that's because the heat conductivity, the ability to conduct heat, is much, much higher in water than in air. So when you are submerged in 4 degrees, if you're naked, then the water will kind of vacuum the heat out of your body because the heat conductivity is so high. So it's very dangerous for us to be in 4 degrees water, and it's potentially dangerous also for the diving animals in these areas. So they need to protect themselves. This is a seal that is caught in the Faroe Islands, and you can see the amount of blubber that these seals have, maybe as much as 10 centimeters. And this is put out just under the skin to isolate the animal. And that's because blubber or fat has the lowest heat conductivity of all the tissues that you have in the body. So it's much better to put blubber or fat than carbohydrates or proteins on the outer surface, because the fur, which is isolating in the this is the polar fox, which is the best insulated animal in the world. It has a fur which with long hairs and dense under hairs, and all of these hairs trap air. And let's say that it's minus 40 in this area where this fox is, but the surrounding temperature of the fox is not the air temperature of minus 40. It's the temperature of the air inside the fur, because the fur is trapping a lot of air. So when this air is trapped, is heated by the body heat of the animal. And let's say that the temperature of the air trapped in the fur is maybe plus 15. Then actually the surrounding temperature of the polar fox is plus 15 and not minus 40. So that's why the polar fox seems to have a good time at this temperature, but we are freezing, well, at least if we don't have clothes. But you cannot trap air in the fur when you are diving. Because the water will push out all the air all the time. So that's why the fur of the seal is not very good. It's not very thick. It's not very dense. Yeah. So that's the difference. But you can also see that they have legs with not a lot of fur on it, and there they have a counter-current heat exchanger system. That we also have, but not so very developed, meaning that warm blood coming down to the foot in blood vessels are very close to blood vessels going back to the body from the foot. And this is cold blood, which has been cooled, and heat, warm blood coming from the body. When they are very close, the heat will go from the warm blood going down over to the cold blood going in, so that you're cooling the blood going out to the foot, and you are heating the blood going into the body. So that's how you conserve the heat in the body. And that's why seagulls, for instance, can stand for a long time on the ice or in very, very cold water. I showed you a picture of the sea otter earlier, and the sea otter has another technique. It has actually, it's amazing, but it has actually 60,000 to 80,000 hairs per square centimeter. It's so dense, the otter fur, that the water cannot reach the skin. And this means that they avoid cooling a lot. They get a little bit cooled, of course, but they avoid cooling a lot, so they have kind of almost a diving suit on them. And also they have a little bit blubber. So this is just a picture to show you how the fur is built. Let's say this is a polar bear. It has long guard hairs, which also are hollow, filled with air. It has dense underfur. It has a darkly pigmented skin, which will absorb warm. As you know, if you have a black T-shirt, it's much warmer than a white T-shirt in a sunny day. And this black skin will absorb heat from the sun. And you have white hair, so you have both camouflage and you attract all the heat. And then you have different amounts of blubber also to insulate under the skin, depending on the season. Of course, blubber or fat is also used as energy in tough periods.